I remember the exact weight of that morning, the way the fluorescent lights hummed in the conference room, how the leather chair creaked when I sat down, the faint smell of someone's vanilla latte mixing with the building's recycled air. I remember thinking, absurdly, that I should have worn different shoes. The ones I had on suddenly felt too loud against the polished floor, each step echoing like an announcement I hadn't meant to make. "Elena, thank you for coming in." Marcus Finch sat across from me with his hands folded on the glass table, fingers interlaced like he was about to pray. He wasn't. Next to him sat Jennifer from HR, a woman I'd shared pleasantries with for years, who now wouldn't meet my eyes. She studied a folder in front of her as if it contained state secrets. I'd been with Apex Marketing for 10 years, a decade. I knew the coffee machine's moods better than my own some mornings. I knew which conference room had the best natural light for presentations, which printer jammed if you didn't tap it just right, where the good pens were hidden in the supply closet. I'd trained half the people in my department. I'd stayed late more times than I could count, missing dinners and birthdays and quiet evenings that I told myself would be there later, always later. Marcus had joined the company 6 months ago, Chief Innovation Officer, his title read, though no one could quite explain what that meant. He was 42 but dressed like he was auditioning for a startup, expensive sneakers with suits, no tie, hair gelled into careful disorder. He spoke in buzzwords and used disrupt as a verb more than any human should. "We're making some organizational changes," he said, his voice carrying that practiced sympathy that comes from too many termination meetings. "The company is moving in a new direction, and we need to restructure to stay competitive." I nodded slowly, my throat suddenly dry. What does that mean for me? Jennifer finally looked up, her expression carefully neutral. "We're eliminating your position, effective immediately." The words didn't land at first. They hovered in the air like they were waiting for permission to make sense. "I'm sorry, you're eliminating my position?" I heard my voice rise slightly, losing the professional calm I'd maintained for a decade. "I manage the entire digital strategy division. I brought in the Thornton account last quarter, our biggest client this year. And we're grateful for your contributions," Marcus said smoothly, "but the market is evolving. We need fresh perspectives, new energy. You understand." I didn't understand. I understood that fresh perspectives meant younger and cheaper. I understood that new energy meant people who wouldn't question 18-hour days or weekend emails. I understood that my 10 years of loyalty, of expertise, of staying when others left, meant exactly nothing to a man who'd been here 6 months. "Is this about the report?" I asked quietly. "The one I submitted about the influencer campaign projections?" Something flickered across Marcus's face. Annoyance, maybe, or satisfaction that I'd figured it out. 2 weeks earlier, I'd presented analysis showing that his proposed influencer strategy was built on inflated metrics and would likely lose money. I'd been diplomatic, professional, backed everything with data. I'd also been right. "This isn't personal, Elena," he said, which meant, of course, it was. "We're offering a generous severance package. 3 months' salary, continuation of benefits for 60 days. Jennifer will walk you through the details." 3 months, after 10 years, after the nights I'd slept on the office couch to meet deadlines, after the vacations I'd cut short, after becoming so tangled up in this place that I sometimes forgot where the job ended and I began. "I'll need you to sign these documents," Jennifer said, sliding papers across the table. "Non-disclosure agreement, non-compete clause, waiver of all legal claims. Take your time reading through everything." But we all knew there was no time. Security was probably already being notified. My access cards would be deactivated within the hour. This was how it worked. Swift, sterile, designed to minimize risk and eliminate resistance. I read through the papers with hands that I willed not to shake. My career reduced to bullet points and legal jargon. Sign here, initial there, acknowledge that you understand you're being erased. "Can I ask one thing?" I said, looking at Marcus. "Was there any way I could have stayed? Anything I could have done differently?" He tilted his head, considering. "You're a talented professional, Elena. I'm sure you'll land on your feet. But this company needs people who are team players, who trust leadership's vision without constant pushback. I needed people who wouldn't tell me I'm wrong, even when I am. I signed the papers. What choice did I have? Fight it in court with money I didn't have against a company with unlimited legal resources? Make a scene and ensure no one in the industry would touch me? No. I signed and I stood and I walked out of that conference room with whatever dignity I could scrape together. Sarah from accounting was waiting by my desk when I got there. We'd been friends, or what passes for friendship in office spaces, which meant lunch sometimes, complaints about meetings, birthday cupcakes from the bakery down the street. I heard, she said quietly. I'm so sorry, Elena. Did everyone know? I asked, looking around the office. People were carefully not looking at me, suddenly very interested in their screens. There were rumors this morning. Marcus had Jennifer book the conference room yesterday. She touched my arm. This is so unfair. You basically built this department. But not unfair enough for anyone to say something. She looked away. You know how it is. We all have mortgages, families. I wanted to... It's fine, I cut her off, because I couldn't bear to hear the justification. I understood it even. Everyone was just trying to survive, trying to keep their own heads above water. But understanding didn't make the silence hurt less. I packed my desk while a security guard named Tom stood nearby, a man I'd chatted with countless mornings, who now had to watch me like I might steal staplers or set fires. 10 years fit into 2 cardboard boxes, a coffee mug from the company retreat in 2019, the plant I'd kept alive against all odds, framed photos of team projects, awards I'd won that suddenly felt like participation trophies. The walk to the elevator was endless. Every step felt observed, judged, pitied. I kept my eyes forward, boxes balanced in my arms, and pressed the button with my elbow. The doors opened. Inside was David Chen, the CFO, a man I'd presented to dozens of times. Elena, he said, surprised. Then he saw the boxes, and his face shifted into that expression I was learning to recognize, awkward sympathy mixed with relief that it wasn't him. I just heard, this is really unexpected. Is it? I asked. He didn't answer. We rode down in silence, him getting off on the 3rd floor for a meeting that mattered, me continuing to the lobby, to the revolving doors, to the street where the October sun was too bright and the air too cold. I stood on the sidewalk with my boxes and tried to remember what normal people did on a Wednesday at 11 in the morning when their entire identity hadn't just been packed into cardboard. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. How's work, sweetheart? I stared at it for a long moment, then put the phone away. I'd tell her later. Right now, I just needed to get home, wherever home was when it wasn't just the place you slept between shifts. The apartment felt different in the middle of the day, quiet in a way that wasn't peaceful, just empty. I set the boxes by the door and stood in my living room, which suddenly seemed too big and too small at the same time. I'd moved here 5 years ago, convinced I was on an upward trajectory. The rent was steep but manageable, or it had been with a steady paycheck and annual raises. Now I did the math in my head. 3 months severance would cover rent, utilities, food, if I was careful. After that, the savings I'd been building for a down payment on a house would have to carry me until I found something else. If I found something else. I made coffee because I didn't know what else to do, sat at my kitchen table, opened my laptop, updated my resume, which felt like writing an obituary for a life I'd thought I was living. My phone rang. Unknown number. Elena Martinez? Speaking. This is Rachel Kim from Velocity Digital. I saw your profile on LinkedIn and wanted to reach out about a potential opportunity. Hope fluttered stupidly in my chest. I'm listening. We're looking for someone with your experience for a senior strategist role. The position would involve... She paused. Actually, before I continue, I should ask, are you still with Apex Marketing? And there it was, the non-compete clause I'd signed, the one that said I couldn't work for a competitor or solicit clients for a year, the one that effectively blacklisted me from my own industry. I'm exploring new opportunities, I said carefully. I see. Well, we'd love to chat, but we'd need to verify that there are no contractual restrictions. Can you forward me your separation agreement? I could hear it in her voice, the interest cooling, the calculation happening. Too risky, too complicated, too much potential legal trouble. Let me get back to you, I said. She said she'd look forward to it. We both knew she wouldn't. I made 17 calls that week, sent 43 emails. Every recruiter had the same response once they learned I'd been let go. We'll keep your resume on file, which meant don't call us. The industry was smaller than it looked. Word traveled. Marcus had connections, and whether he'd actively spread a message or simply let silence do the work, the result was the same. I was toxic, a risk, someone who challenged leadership and paid for it, which made every company wonder if I'd do the same to them. By the end of the first month, my severance was half gone, and I had nothing to show for it but rejection emails and growing anxiety that sat in my chest like a stone. I stood in my bathroom one night, staring at myself in the mirror. I'd lost weight. There were shadows under my eyes. I didn't remember being there. I looked tired. I looked scared. You are not going to break, I told my reflection. You are not going to disappear. My voice sounded stronger than I felt. The library became my office. The apartment felt like failure, but the library felt like possibility. I camped out at the same table by the window, surrounded by books I'd never thought to read before, teaching myself things that had nothing to do with marketing strategies or client presentations. Real estate investment, property management, tax codes and zoning laws and mortgage calculations. I read about people who'd built empires from nothing, who'd taken disasters and turned them into opportunities. I watched YouTube videos at 2 in the morning, taking notes on legal structures and LLC formations. It started as desperation. If I couldn't work in my field, I needed to find another way. But somewhere in those late nights, something shifted. This wasn't just survival. This was interesting. I learned that money isn't made by working harder. It's made by making money work. I learned about leverage and appreciation and the difference between cash flow and equity. I learned that rich people don't get rich from paychecks. They get rich from assets. I'd spent 10 years building someone else's empire. What if I built my own? My severance ran out. I moved to a smaller apartment in a worse neighborhood, cutting my rent by 1/3. I sold my car and used public transit. I stopped buying coffee out, stopped going to restaurants, stopped doing anything that wasn't essential. Every dollar got funneled into one account, one goal. My mother called weekly, concerned. Mija, are you eating? Are you okay? I'm fine, Mom. You don't sound fine. You sound tired. I'm just figuring things out. Come home for a while. Your room is still here. You could rest, take some time. I can't rest. I need to do this. She didn't understand. How could she? She'd worked the same nursing job for 30 years, believed in loyalty and hard work, and that companies took care of you if you took care of them. She'd never been fired without cause, never had a decade of dedication dissolve like it was nothing. I started freelancing, small projects I found on contractor websites, one-off gigs that paid terrible rates but paid something, logo designs, social media audits, content strategy for startups that couldn't afford real agencies. I worked 16-hour days every day, living on rice and eggs and determination. And I saved. God, I saved. Every dollar that wasn't rent or basic survival went into that account. I watched it grow with an intensity that might have been unhealthy if I'd cared about healthy. 6 months after I was fired, I had $15,000. 9 months in, $28,000. A year later, I had $42,000 and a plan that seemed absolutely insane. I was going to buy a property. The house was a disaster. There's no other way to describe it. A small single family in a neighborhood that was transitioning, which meant it had been rough for decades and was maybe, possibly, starting to improve. The roof leaked, the carpet smelled like something had died in it, the kitchen cabinets hung at angles that defied physics. The real estate agent, a tired woman named Gloria, who clearly wasn't used to buyers like me, walked through it with barely concealed disgust. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. "There are other properties that might be more move-in ready." "How much can I negotiate down?" I asked. She looked at her papers. "Listed at $68,000. It's been on the market for 4 months. I think we could get it for $60, maybe $58 if we're lucky." I did the math I'd done 100 times already. With my $42,000, I could put down 20%, get a conventional mortgage for the rest. My monthly payment would be around $400. If I could rent it for $800, I'd clear $300 a month after expenses, assuming nothing catastrophic happened. It wasn't much, but it was positive cash flow, it was an asset, it was a start. I'll offer $55,000, I said. Gloria raised her eyebrows. Cash? Down payment, I'll need financing for the rest. Honey, with your income, I know, but I have good credit, stable freelance income, documentation for everything. Find me a lender who'll work with me. She did. It took 3 weeks and more paperwork than should be legal, but she did. The seller, desperate after months of no offers, accepted $56,000. I signed the papers in Gloria's office on a Tuesday morning. My hands shook so badly I could barely write my name. This was every dollar I had, every sacrifice, every ramen dinner and walked mile and skipped social event. This was betting everything on a future I couldn't guarantee. Gloria handed me the keys. Congratulations, you're a property owner. I sat in my car outside that disaster of a house and cried. Not sad tears, something else. Relief, maybe? Or terror? Or the feeling of having chosen a direction after a year of freefall. I spent the next 3 months renovating it myself. YouTube became my teacher again. How to replace flooring, fix drywall, paint properly, install light fixtures. I worked in the house during the day, freelanced at night, slept when I could. My hands got calloused, my back ached constantly. I dropped a hammer on my foot and probably broke a toe, but couldn't afford to verify it at a doctor's office. I painted until I dreamed in color swatches. But slowly, impossibly, the house transformed. At a 1.0 plank flooring throughout, fresh paint in warm neutrals, fixed cabinets and updated lighting. I couldn't afford granite countertops or designer fixtures, but I made it clean, functional, welcoming. I listed it for rent at $750 a month, had 5 inquiries in 2 days. The tenant I chose was a young couple, both teachers, who looked at the house like it was a palace. "This is perfect," the woman said, walking through the living room. "How soon can we move in?" "First and last month's rent, plus security deposit," I said, trying to sound professional and not like someone who desperately needed this to work. They wrote the check that afternoon. I deposited it the next morning and stood at the bank's ATM staring at my balance. For the first time in over a year, I could breathe without calculating disaster. The second property came 8 months later, a duplex this time, even rougher than the first house, but with potential. I'd saved the profits from the rental plus every freelance dollar, built my credit higher, learned more about creative financing. This time the renovation went faster. I knew what I was doing. I knew which contractors to trust, where to find deals on materials, how to prioritize fixes that added value versus those that just looked nice. I rented both units within a week of finishing. The third property came a year after that, then a fourth, then a fifth. I wasn't getting rich, not even close, but I was building something. Every property gave me a little more income, a little more leverage for the next purchase. I was learning about negotiation, about property values, about which neighborhoods were about to turn, about tax strategies and depreciation, and how to read a market. I barely slept. I worked 7 days a week, managing tenants and repairs and renovations and freelance projects that kept cash flowing. I had no social life, no dating, no hobbies, just work and property and the slow, grinding accumulation of equity. 3 years after I was fired, I owned 8 rental properties. My monthly cash flow was enough to live on modestly. I'd built something that Marcus and his restructuring and his fresh perspectives couldn't touch. I thought about Apex sometimes. Wondered if they missed me, if the department had fallen apart, if Marcus had moved on to ruin someone else's life. But mostly I was too busy to care. I'd found something that mattered more than revenge. I'd found proof that I could survive anything. Then one morning, my phone rang. Gloria, my real estate agent. "Elena, I have something you need to see." The building was downtown. 12 stories of glass and steel, the kind of modern architecture that was supposed to look innovative, but mostly just reflected the sky. I'd walked past it 100 times before without noticing. "It's been on the market for 6 months, Gloria said as we stood on the sidewalk looking up. "The previous owner was a development group that went bankrupt. Bank repossession, they're motivated to sell." Gloria, I can't afford a downtown high-rise. Just look at the numbers. She handed me a folder. The building is 70% occupied. Most leases are long-term commercial. Current annual income is 1.8 million. They're asking 11 million, but the appraisal came in at 9. I think we could get it for 8.5 with the right offer. I opened the folder, scanning the tenant list. Law firms, consulting companies, a medical practice, and there on page 3, in suite 1107, Apex Marketing, LLC. My heart stopped. Is this a joke? I asked quietly. Gloria looked confused. What? This company, Apex Marketing, when did they move here? She checked her notes. About 2 years ago. They're actually one of the larger tenants, occupy the entire 11th floor. Their lease is up for renewal in 3 months. I stared at the building, at my reflection in its glass walls. 2 years ago, right around when I bought my second property. They'd been here, in this building, while I was learning to fix leaking toilets and negotiate with contractors. They'd moved on, grown, occupied an entire floor, while I'd been trying to figure out how to survive. And now, their building was for sale. I can't afford this, I said again, but my mind was already working through possibilities. Not alone, Gloria agreed, but you have 8 properties, all with equity. You could leverage them, bring in partners, maybe form an LLC. With the right structure and financing, you could make this work. Why would I want to? She smiled. Because, honey, you've been working your ass off for 3 years on properties that make you a few hundred a month each. This building would give you cash flow in the tens of thousands monthly. This is how you scale. This is how you build real wealth. I looked at that tenant list again. Apex Marketing. This wasn't about revenge. I'd moved past that, hadn't I? I'd built a life. I was fine. But I wasn't fine. Standing there, looking at that building, I realized I'd been running for 3 years without ever stopping to look back. I'd convinced myself that success was enough, that surviving was victory. But I hadn't healed. I'd just buried the wound under work and exhaustion. Tell me what I'd need to do, I said. The next 2 months were the hardest of my life, and that's saying something considering the previous 3 years. I worked with lenders, investors, accountants, lawyers. I created detailed financial projections, property analyses, market studies. I leveraged every property I owned, took out lines of credit, brought in 2 silent partners who provided capital in exchange for minority shares in the LLC I formed. I barely ate, barely slept, lived on coffee and determination and something that felt like purpose but might have just been obsession. The building's owner was a bank that wanted it off their books. They cared about one thing, a buyer who could close. I came in with proof of funds, solid financing, a business plan that showed I understood exactly what I was buying. You're taking on a lot of risk, my lawyer said as we reviewed the purchase agreement. If occupancy drops or you can't renew leases, you could lose everything. I know. Are you sure about this? You've built something good with your residential portfolio. This is a completely different scale. I'm sure. I wasn't sure, but I was committed. The closing was on a Thursday. I sat in a conference room remarkably similar to the one where I'd been fired, signing papers that transferred ownership of a building worth millions of dollars. When it was done, the bank's representative shook my hand. Congratulations, Ms. Martinez. You're a commercial property owner. I drove to the building that afternoon, parked across the street and just looked at it. Mine. Not just the building, the ground beneath every company inside it, the space they occupied, the air they breathed. I thought about calling someone, celebrating somehow, but I had no one to call. I'd spent 3 years so focused on survival that I'd forgotten to maintain friendships, relationships, anything that wasn't directly related to staying afloat. So I sat in my car and allowed myself one moment of pure satisfaction. Then I got to work. Managing a commercial building was different from managing houses and duplexes. I hired a property manager who knew what she was doing, reviewed every lease, studied every clause. Most tenants were stable, happy to stay. Their leases had standard renewal terms, rent increases that tracked with market rates, except for one. Apex Marketing's lease was up for renewal in 6 weeks. standard commercial lease with a clause that required 90 days notice for termination from either party. They'd missed that window, which meant by default the lease would renew automatically unless I chose not to renew. I read that lease so many times I could recite it, looked for any reason they could claim I had to keep them. There was none. As the new owner, I had full discretion on lease renewals, provided I followed proper legal procedures. I sat with that information for a week, turning it over in my mind like a stone. What did I want? Revenge? Justice? To hurt them the way they'd hurt me? I called an old friend from law school, someone I'd stayed loosely in touch with. Hypothetically, I said, if a landlord chose not to renew a commercial lease, what's required? Written notice within the time frame specified in the lease, usually 60 to 90 days. After that, the tenant has to vacate. If they don't, landlord can pursue eviction. Can a landlord refuse to renew without cause? In commercial leases, generally yes, unless there's specific language preventing it. Landlords have wide discretion. Why? Just curious. She laughed. You're a terrible liar, Elena. What are you planning? Nothing. Maybe something. I don't know yet. Whatever it is, be careful. The law might be on your side, but that doesn't mean it won't get messy. I spent another week thinking about it. I walked through the building, familiarizing myself with every detail. I met with tenants, introduced myself, assured them nothing would change under new ownership. And one afternoon, I took the elevator to the 11th floor. The doors opened on a space that was nothing like what I remembered. Apex had clearly upgraded. Glass walls, open floor plan, expensive furniture, that intentional industrial aesthetic that cost a fortune to look unfinished. A large sign behind the reception desk, Apex Marketing, disrupting tomorrow today. The receptionist looked up, young, probably 23, with the kind of perfect makeup that required getting up way too early. Can I help you? I'm Elena Martinez. I'm the new building owner. I wanted to introduce myself to your management. Her smile faltered slightly. Oh, let me check if anyone's available. She made a call, spoke quietly, then gestured to a waiting area. I sat on an expensive couch and looked around. Modern art on the walls, awards displayed in backlit cases, photos of the team at various events and retreats. I scanned them, recognizing some faces, not others. And then I saw Marcus. Not in person, in one of the photos. Same carefully disheveled hair, same expensive casual outfit. He was in the center of a group shot, arms around two younger employees, grinning at the camera. Ms. Martinez? I turned. A woman stood there, mid-30s, professional suit, practiced smile. I'm Lauren Reeves, Director of Operations. Welcome. We shook hands. Thank you. I wanted to meet with key tenants, make sure everyone's comfortable with the ownership transition. Of course. Would you like to see the space? If you have time. She walked me through the office. Open workstations where young people typed intensely. Conference rooms with names like Innovation Station and The Disruption Zone. A break room with an espresso machine that probably cost more than my first car. We've really made this place our own, Lauren said proudly. The previous landlord was very accommodating about our build-out. I can see that. How long have you been with the company? 4 years. It's been an incredible journey. We've more than doubled in size since I started. That's impressive. And your leadership team? Oh, they're visionary. Marcus Finch, our Chief Innovation Officer, really transformed this place. My face didn't change. Years of client meetings had taught me how to maintain a neutral expression. He's been with the company a while then? About 5 years now. He really shook things up when he arrived. Got rid of dead weight, brought in fresh talent. It's a completely different culture now. Dead weight. I let that sit there between us. Well, everything looks great, I said. I notice your lease is up for renewal soon. Yes, we got the notification. We'll definitely be renewing. This location is perfect for us. Good to know. I'll be in touch. I rode the elevator down in silence. Dead weight. Fresh talent. Different culture. I went home and pulled up Apex Marketing's website. They'd grown, yes, more employees, more clients, a slicker presentation. I dug deeper, found their financial filings, their client list, and there, in their case studies, I found it. The Thornton account, the one I'd brought in. They were still using my strategy, my approach, my work, just with someone else's name on it. I opened my laptop and began drafting a letter. The letter went through 4 revisions. The first version was angry, accusatory, raw. The second was cold and professional but too detailed, explaining too much. The third was better but still carried an edge of emotion that didn't belong. The final version was perfect. Dear Apex Marketing, this letter serves as official notice that the commercial lease for Suite 1107 at 450 Waterston Boulevard will not be renewed upon its expiration on March 31st. As per the terms of your lease agreement, you are required to vacate the premises by this date and return the space in its original condition, minus normal wear and tear. Please contact our property management office to schedule a final walkthrough and arrange for the return of your security deposit, pending inspection. All standard lease termination procedures apply. Sincerely, Elena Martinez, Waterston Properties, LLC. I read it 20 times, looking for anything that could be construed as personal or vindictive. It was perfectly legal, perfectly professional. It said nothing about why, offered no explanation. It simply exercised my right as a property owner to choose my tenants. I sent it via certified mail and email. Then I waited. The call came 2 days later. Lauren Reeves, her voice tight with concern. Ms. Martinez, I received your letter regarding our lease. I think there's been some misunderstanding. No misunderstanding. The lease expires March 31st. It won't be renewed. But we've been excellent tenants. We pay on time. We maintain the space. Is this about rent? We're willing to negotiate an increase. It's not about rent. Then what is it about? We have a business to run, employees to think about. You can't just evict us without cause. I'm not evicting you. I'm choosing not to renew your lease, which is my right as the property owner. You have 90 days to find alternative space. Her voice shifted from concerned to angry. This is completely unreasonable. I need to speak with your superior. I don't have a superior. I own the building. Silence. Then, I'm going to need to escalate this to our leadership. That's your prerogative. The decision stands. She hung up without saying goodbye. I sat back in my chair, my heart pounding. It was done. No taking it back now. The next call came from Marcus himself. I was in the middle of a property inspection at one of my rental houses when my phone rang. A number. I almost didn't answer. Elena Martinez. Elena, it's Marcus Finch from Apex Marketing. His voice. I hadn't heard it in nearly 4 years, but I recognized it immediately. That smooth, confident tone that assumed every conversation was a negotiation he'd win. Mr. Finch, what can I do for you? I think you know. I received a very concerning letter about our lease. Standard business communication. Your lease is expiring, and I'm choosing not to renew. Come on, Elena. This is clearly personal. There it was, my name in his mouth. Familiar, like we were colleagues or friends, like he had any right to familiarity. I'm not sure what you mean, I said calmly. I'm making a business decision about my property. Don't play games. I looked you up after I got this letter. I know who you are. I know you used to work here. I did. And you fired me without cause after 10 years of excellent service because I had the audacity to present data you didn't like. That was years ago, and it wasn't personal. It was a business decision. Exactly, I said. Just like this is a business decision. This is different. You're targeting us specifically. That's retaliation. No, retaliation would have been illegal. This is simply me exercising my property rights. You have 90 days. We have hundreds of employees on that floor. You're disrupting. Disrupting? I couldn't help the small laugh. I thought that's what you valued. Fresh perspectives, new energy. Isn't that what you told me? Elena. Ms. Martinez. Silence. I could almost hear him recalibrating, trying to find an angle. Look, let's be reasonable here. We're willing to pay market rates, top of market even. Name your price. The space isn't available. Everything's available at the right price, not this. You realize we could sue, claim discrimination, improper business practices? You could try, though I'm not sure how you'd prove discrimination when I'm exercising standard landlord rights that you yourself would exercise without hesitation. But by all means, consult your lawyers. I'm sure they'll confirm what mine already have. I'm within my legal rights. More silence. Then, with an edge in his voice I'd never heard before, "You're making a mistake. We can make things very difficult for you." Is that a threat? It's a reality check. You might own this building, but you're new to commercial real estate. You have no idea how complicated things can get. Actually, I've spent the last 4 years learning exactly how complicated things can get. I've learned a lot, Mr. Finch, about leverage, about power, about how quickly circumstances can change. 90 days. I hung up. My hands were shaking. Not from fear, from something else. From the feeling of standing my ground against someone who'd crushed me 4 years ago and thought I'd stay crushed. The next few weeks were difficult. Marcus wasn't bluffing about making things complicated. Apex's lawyers sent letters claiming improper notice, demanding lease renewal, threatening litigation. My lawyers responded to each one, methodically explaining why every claim was baseless. They filed complaints with the city, claiming safety violations in the building. Inspectors came, found nothing. They contacted other tenants, trying to gather evidence of discrimination or improper management. The tenants, who I'd been treating well, had nothing negative to say. They leaked a story to a local business blog, Small Business Struggles as New Landlord Forces Eviction. The article painted me as a heartless property mogul squeezing out a beloved local company. The comment section was predictably awful. But I'd learned something in 4 years. I didn't need everyone's approval. I just needed to be right. I didn't respond publicly, didn't defend myself, just continued following proper legal procedures, documenting everything, maintaining professional boundaries. Sarah reached Tribressi, continued out during this time, an email to my business account, short and tentative. "Elena, I saw the news about Apex and your building. I don't know if you'll want to hear from me, but I wanted to say I'm sorry. For not speaking up when you were fired, for being a coward. You didn't deserve what happened, and I was wrong to stay silent. I hope you're doing well. Sarah." I stared at that email for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let the silence stand as its own answer. But another part, the part that remembered shared lunches and birthday cupcakes and someone who'd at least said she was sorry when I was fired, couldn't leave it unanswered. "Sarah, thank you for reaching out. I understand why you stayed silent. Everyone was protecting themselves. I don't hold it against you. I'm doing more than well. Take care, Elena." As March approached, I watched Apex scramble. Moving trucks started appearing at the building. They'd found new space, apparently, a smaller office across town. I heard through my property manager that they were downsizing, letting people go to afford the move. I felt a twinge of guilt about the employees losing their jobs. They hadn't fired me. Most of them probably hadn't even known it happened. But then I remembered. Marcus had laid people off when I challenged him. He'd eliminated positions, disrupted lives, called it necessary business. If his company couldn't absorb the cost of moving, if he had to downsize because of his own poor planning and inflated overhead, that wasn't on me. Still, I called my property manager. "The employees who are losing their jobs because of the move, do we have any positions available in the building? Maybe some of the other tenants are hiring?" She checked. "The law firm on 7 is looking for paralegals. The medical practice needs administrative staff. Send me the listings. I'll pass them along." "Really? After everything they've put you through?" "The employees didn't do anything to me. If I can help them land somewhere, I will." I created a simple document listing the open positions and sent it to Apex's HR department with a brief note, "For any staff affected by your relocation." Lauren Reeves called me the next day. I got your email, she said, her voice different than before, quieter, less defensive, about the job listings. I hope it helps someone. Elena, it is Elena, right? Can I call you that? Yes. This whole situation. I looked you up. I saw you used to work here. I didn't know. Why would you? Marcus never mentioned it. He said the previous tenant in the space was difficult, that you were doing this to be vindictive. But after I looked into it, after I talked to some people who were here back then, I'm sorry for what he did to you and for what I said about dead weight. I didn't know. I closed my eyes. This wasn't what I'd expected. Thank you for saying that. For what it's worth, this move is probably good for us. We were overextended here, paying too much rent for space we didn't need. Marcus kept pushing for expansion without the revenue to support it. The company's in rough shape financially. I didn't know that. He's good at making things look successful, but between you and me, we've been losing clients for 2 years. The Thornton account, the big one we had, left 6 months ago, said our strategy wasn't working anymore. The Thornton account, my account, the one I'd built, and they'd lost it because whoever took over couldn't maintain what I'd created. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, and meant it. I'm looking for something else, Lauren said quietly. I've been here 4 years, and I'm tired of the culture, the backstabbing, the credit stealing, the way Marcus pits people against each other. If you hear of anything, what's your background? Operations management, process improvement. I'm good at systems, at making things run efficiently. I thought about my growing property portfolio. 8 residential properties, now this commercial building. I was stretched thin, trying to manage everything myself with just one part-time property manager. Send me your resume, I said. I might have something. March 31st arrived on a Tuesday. I went to the building early, met with my property manager for the final walkthrough of the Apex space. The office was empty. They'd removed everything, furniture, art, even the expensive signage. What remained was just a shell, marked with holes where things had been mounted, carpet worn in traffic patterns, walls needing fresh paint. They did a decent job cleaning, my property manager said, making notes. Some repairs needed, but nothing major. Security deposit should cover it. We walked through the space room by room. I stood in what had been Marcus's office. I'd seen it during my tour, all glass and minimalist furniture and a view of the city skyline. This was where he'd made the decision to fire me, where he'd signed off on the paperwork, where he'd planned the meeting, where he'd convinced himself that removing someone who challenged him was leadership. And now it was empty. He was gone. I waited for satisfaction, for triumph, for the rush of revenge completed. But what I felt was nothing, just tired emptiness, like finishing a race you didn't particularly want to run. My phone rang. Unknown number again. Against my better judgment, I answered. Elena Martinez. Elena, it's Marcus. I almost hung up. Mr. Finch, what can I do for you? I'm calling to let you know we've completed the move out. Everything should be in order. I'm here now. Looks fine. Silence. Then, I also wanted to say, look, I know things ended badly between us. I know you see this as payback. Do you have a point? I just want you to know, I didn't fire you because I hated you or because you were bad at your job. You were talented. You are talented. But you didn't fit the direction the company was going. You fired me because I was right and you couldn't handle it? Maybe partly, but also because I knew you'd never respect me. Every presentation, every meeting, I could see it in your face. You thought you were smarter than me. I was smarter than you. He laughed, surprising me. Yeah, you probably were. But a company can't run with people who are constantly undermining leadership, even if they're right. So you fired anyone who disagreed with you and surrounded yourself with people who told you what you wanted to hear. How'd that work out, Marcus? Where's the Thornton account? Another silence. You heard about that. I hear a lot of things. I also hear your company's struggling, that you're downsizing, that your big vision of disruption turned out to be expensive failure. We're pivoting. It's part of the process. Sure it is. Well, good luck with your pivot. I have actual work to do. Elena, wait. He stopped, and when he spoke again, his voice was different, less confident, almost uncertain. I wanted to apologize for how things went down. You deserved better than being escorted out like a criminal. I should have done it differently. I leaned against the wall of his empty office, looking out at the city. 4 years ago, an apology might have meant something. 4 years ago, I'd been desperate for acknowledgement, for validation, for someone to admit they'd been wrong. Now, you're 4 years late, I said quietly, and I don't think you're actually sorry. I think your company is failing, your reputation is damaged, and you're realizing that burning bridges has consequences. I think you're making this call hoping I'll feel sorry for you, maybe even help you somehow, but I don't, and I won't. I've spent 4 years building something that nobody can take from me. I own property, I own this building, I own my future. You don't get to own my pain or my forgiveness. We're done here. I hung up and blocked the number. My property manager looked at me. You okay? Yeah, I said, surprised to realize it was true. I really am. I hired Lauren Reeves a week later as Director of Operations for Waterston Properties. She was smart, organized, hungry to prove herself outside of Marcus's toxic ecosystem. Within 3 months, she'd streamlined our processes, implemented better tenant communication systems, and identified 2 more commercial properties worth acquiring. The Apex space sat empty for a month while we renovated. Fresh paint, new carpet, some minor upgrades. Then a tech startup leased it at 15% more than Apex had been paying. Young company, solid backing, excited about the space. They seem good, my property manager said as we reviewed the lease. Much better fit than the last tenant. Let's hope so. The business grew. I acquired 2 more commercial buildings, expanded the residential portfolio to 15 properties. Lauren hired staff. We opened an actual office, had business cards printed, developed systems that didn't depend on me working 18-hour days. I could breathe again, sleep regular hours, start thinking about things beyond survival. One Saturday morning, I drove past my old apartment, the expensive one I'd rented when I thought I was moving up in the world before everything fell apart. Someone else lived there now, probably facing their own struggles, their own dreams. I drove past the library, where I'd taught myself real estate, past the terrible house that had been my first purchase, past all the landmarks of my personal apocalypse and reconstruction. And then I drove to the building, my building, parked across the street just like I had on the day I bought it. It looked the same, glass and steel reflecting the morning sky. But I was different. I wasn't sitting in my car crying or celebrating or trying to figure out what victory meant. I was just there, present, solid. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. Are you coming for dinner tomorrow? I'm making your favorite. I smiled. When was the last time I'd gone home? Not just a quick obligatory visit, but actually gone home, spent time, been present? I'll be there, I texted back. Should I bring anything? Just yourself, mija. That's all I need. The industry started noticing what I'd built. A local business magazine wanted to do a profile. From fired to financial freedom, how one woman built a real estate empire. I declined the interview. It wasn't about publicity or recognition. It never had been. But the invitations came anyway. Speaking requests, mentorship programs, women's business networks wanting to hear my story. I accepted a few, carefully chosen. Small groups, specific audiences. People who were where I'd been, trying to figure out how to survive after disaster. I spoke at a community college one evening to a room of maybe 30 people. Young people trying to figure out their paths, older people pivoting after layoffs or divorces or other life catastrophes. I'm not going to tell you it was easy, I said, standing at the front of the classroom. It wasn't. There were nights I ate ramen because that's all I could afford. Days I cried in my car because I couldn't see how it would work out. Moments when I was certain I'd made terrible decisions and was going to lose everything. They watched me, some nodding, recognizing themselves in the story. But here's what I learned. Failure only destroys you if you let it define you. When I was fired, I thought my career was over. I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. And maybe I had, but only everything that could be taken away. What I built after couldn't be taken. Property, assets, skills, knowledge, those belong to me. Nobody gets to fire me from my own life. A young woman raised her hand. But how did you start? I mean, you had no money, no job, no connections. Where did you even begin? I began exactly where I was, which was nowhere. I started with one decision. I'm not giving up. Then another. I'm going to learn something new. Then another. I'm going to save every dollar I can. Small decisions repeated constantly until they added up to something real. Did you ever want to give up? Someone else asked. Every single day for the first 6 months, most days for the first year, sometimes even now. But wanting to give up and actually giving up are different things. You're allowed to be tired. You're allowed to doubt. You're allowed to cry and rage and feel sorry for yourself. And then you do the next thing anyway. After the talk, people lingered, asking questions, sharing their own stories. A man in his 50s who'd been laid off after 25 years. A woman escaping an abusive relationship with nothing but her car. A recent graduate drowning in student debt and unable to find work. I listened, offered what advice I could, gave some of them my contact information, told them to reach out if they needed guidance. Driving home that night, I thought about Marcus again, not with anger anymore, with something like curiosity. I wondered if he ever thought about me, if he connected his company's decline to the culture he'd created, if he'd learned anything. Probably not. People like Marcus rarely did. They just moved on to the next company, the next fresh start, the next group of people to convince that they were visionaries. But that was his story, not mine, and I was done letting his choices shape my narrative. 5 years after I was fired, I went back to that library, the same table by the window where I'd sat for months, teaching myself real estate, fighting panic and despair with spreadsheets and YouTube videos. I brought my laptop, ordered coffee from the little cafe they'd added, and sat down to work on a business plan for my next acquisition. Everything felt the same and completely different. "Excuse me?" I looked up. A young woman stood there, maybe 25, with tired eyes and a laptop clutched to her chest like a shield. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, "but I've seen you here before. Well, not recently, but a while ago. You used to sit at this table all the time. I was going through something bad back then, and I'd watch you working, so focused, and I'd think, if she can keep showing up, so can I." I stared at her, not sure what to say. "I just wanted to tell you that. You probably don't remember, but you helped me. Just by being here, working on whatever you were working on, so thank you." She walked away before I could respond, finding her own table, opening her own laptop to fight her own battles. I sat there for a moment, processing. How many other people had been in that library, watching each other, drawing strength from the simple fact that someone else was also trying? How many quiet witnesses were there to our struggles? How many invisible connections? I packed up my laptop and left, but not before looking around the library one more time. All these people fighting their own wars, building their own futures. We were all so alone and so together. The real closure came 7 years after I was fired, on a random Thursday afternoon. I was meeting with my accountant, reviewing year-end financials for Waterston Properties. The company had grown beyond anything I'd imagined. 32 properties, including 4 commercial buildings, annual revenue in the millions, a staff of 8. "You know," my accountant said, pointing at the numbers, "you've reached a point where you could step back if you wanted. Hire a CEO, become more of a passive investor. Enjoy life a little." Is that your professional recommendation? It's my personal observation. You're 43 years old, financially secure, and you still work 60-hour weeks. What are you building toward? It was a good question. When was enough? That evening, I drove to the building downtown, the one that had started everything. I took the elevator to the 11th floor, to the space that had been Apex's. The tech startup was thriving. Through the glass walls, I could see people working, collaborating, laughing. Young energy, genuine enthusiasm. They'd painted one wall with a mural of a rocket ship launching into a constellation of code. It was cheesy and earnest and full of hope. This space had held so much pain, mine, Marcus's, all the people caught in the corporate machinery. But that pain wasn't here anymore. It had been painted over, renovated, repurposed. The space was just space now, neutral, waiting to hold whatever story came next. I took the elevator to the roof. The building had a small observation deck, accessible to tenants. I stood there as the sun set, watching the city light up. My phone rang. Lauren. Hey, sorry to bother you after hours, but I wanted to give you news. We got the bid on the Fletcher building. The Fletcher building, 18 stories, prime location, perfect anchor for expanding our downtown portfolio. We'd been negotiating for months. That's amazing. Well done. So we're moving forward? I looked out at the city, at all the buildings, all the lives happening in them, all the people being fired and hired, succeeding and failing, dreaming and despairing. Yeah, I said, we're moving forward. Because that's what you did. You kept building. Not because you were running from something anymore, but because you'd learned how. Because you could. Because making something solid and real from nothing but determination felt like the best possible use of a life. I never saw Marcus again. I heard things occasionally. He'd moved to another company, been fired himself within a year, tried consulting, started a podcast that nobody listened to. His trajectory was down while mine was up, and I suppose there's poetry in that. But the real poetry wasn't in his falling. It was in my rising. I thought about revenge constantly in those early days. Imagined confrontations, speeches, moments of dramatic justice. I'd fantasized about making him hurt the way he'd hurt me, about watching him understand what he'd taken. But when the moment came, when I stood in his empty office after his company left my building, I felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction. Just the quiet recognition that I'd moved so far past needing his acknowledgement that his presence or absence didn't matter. That was the real victory. Not forcing him out of my building, but realizing I'd already forced him out of my head. 10 years after I was fired, I received an invitation to speak at a business leadership conference. The topic, resilience and reinvention in the modern economy. I almost declined. I'd never been comfortable with public speaking, with positioning myself as someone who had answers rather than someone still figuring it out. But the organizer was persistent. Your story matters, she said. Not the revenge part. I mean, that's interesting, but it's not the point. What matters is showing people that getting destroyed doesn't have to be the end, that sometimes the end is actually a beginning. So I accepted. The conference was downtown, in one of those massive hotel ballrooms that make you feel small. Hundreds of people in business attire, clutching coffee, checking phones, existing in that peculiar space of professional networking. I stood backstage, waiting for my introduction, fighting the urge to run. You'll be great, Lauren said. She'd come with me for support, bringing files in case I needed them, which we both knew I wouldn't. What if I'm not? What if my story doesn't actually help anyone? What if it's just, I don't know, specific to me? Then it's specific to you, and maybe 5 other people in that audience who need to hear it, and that's enough. The introduction came. I walked onto the stage, stood behind the podium, looked out at all those faces. 10 years ago, I began, I got fired from a job I loved, or thought I loved. Looking back, I think I was in love with the idea of being valuable, of being essential, of mattering to something bigger than myself. The audience was quiet, attentive. When they fired me, they took that away, or I thought they did. I thought my value was tied to what I produced for someone else, what I contributed to their vision, their success. And when they said I wasn't needed anymore, I believed them. I thought if they didn't need me, maybe I didn't have value at all. I paused, took a breath. It took me a long time to understand that they didn't take my value. They just clarified where my value had been going, into building someone else's empire instead of my own. Getting fired was the most painful, terrifying, ultimately necessary thing that ever happened to me, because it forced me to answer a question I'd been avoiding. What do I want to build? Not for someone else, not for approval or recognition or a paycheck, just for me. What do I want to create that's mine? I talked for 40 minutes about failure and fear and the grinding work of rebuilding, about leveraging assets and learning skills, and the difference between revenge and justice. About the moment I realized I'd won, not when Marcus left my building, but when I stopped caring if he did. Poetic justice isn't about punishment, I concluded. It's about transformation. It's about taking what broke you and using it as foundation for something stronger. The person who fired me wanted me to disappear. Instead, I became impossible to ignore. Not because I destroyed him, because I built something he couldn't touch, couldn't take, couldn't diminish. That's the real revenge, being so completely yourself that nobody else's opinion matters anymore. The applause started before I finished the last sentence. I stood there, overwhelmed, as people rose to their feet. Afterward, there was a line, people wanting to talk, to share their own stories, to ask advice. I stayed for 2 hours, listening, responding, trying to offer what I'd learned without pretending I had all the answers. One woman, probably in her 60s, waited until the very end. "I was fired 30 years ago," she said quietly, "from a teaching job I adored. I never recovered. I did other work, but I always felt diminished, like I'd lost something essential and never got it back." "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. "Don't be. I'm telling you because hearing you tonight, I realized something." I spent 30 years angry at the person who fired me, waiting for some kind of justice that never came. But the real justice was always available. I just never claimed it. I never built something new. I just stayed angry about what I'd lost. She smiled, sad but genuine. "It's too late for me to start a real estate empire, but maybe it's not too late to stop being angry. Maybe that's my version of justice, just letting it go." She left, and I stood in the empty ballroom, thinking about all the ways we stay trapped, all the prisons we build from old pain. These days, I start my mornings with coffee on my balcony. I bought a condo 2 years ago. Nothing extravagant, just a place with good light and a view of the city. A place that's mine, that I chose, that I could afford without stretching. I think about the apartment I left when I was fired, the one I couldn't afford to keep. How desperate I'd felt, how much I'd seen that loss as failure. Now I understood. It wasn't failure. It was shedding something too heavy to carry. Waterston Properties runs mostly without me now. Lauren is CEO, handling day-to-day operations with the skill I never quite achieved. I still own the company, still make major decisions, but I've learned to delegate, to trust, to accept that other people might do things differently than I would, and that's okay. I've started teaching, not formally, but mentoring people who reach out, who are where I was, scared and angry and trying to figure out how to survive. I don't sugarcoat it. I tell them it's hard, that some days they'll want to give up, that success isn't guaranteed just because you work hard. But I also tell them this: you are not what happened to you. You're what you build from it. Last month, I was grabbing lunch at a cafe downtown when I saw her, Jennifer, HR Jennifer, from Apex, the woman who'd sat next to Marcus in that conference room 10 years ago, unable to meet my eyes. She was at a table by the window, laptop open, looking tired, older, worn down by a decade of corporate machinery. I could have left, pretended not to see her, but I'd spent enough years running from ghosts. "Jennifer," I said, walking over. She looked up, and I watched her cycle through recognition, confusion, embarrassment, resignation. "Elena, hi. I wasn't sure if you'd remember me." "I remember." "Would you like to sit?" "Or not. I understand if not." I sat. We looked at each other across the small table, across 10 years and everything that had happened in them. "I owe you an apology," she said finally, "for that day, for all of it. I knew it was wrong, what they were doing to you. I knew Marcus was getting rid of anyone who challenged him. But I needed the job, and I told myself that staying quiet was survival." "It was survival." "No, it was cowardice. There's a difference." She closed her laptop. "I left Apex 3 years ago. They pushed me out too, eventually. Younger, cheaper, less complicated. I spent 30 years in HR, and when my turn came, nobody spoke up for me either. Karma, I guess." "I'm sorry that happened to you." "Are you? Really?" I thought about it honestly. "Yeah, I am. Not because I think you didn't make mistakes. You did. But because I know what it feels like, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone, not even the people who did it to me." She smiled slightly. "You're more forgiving than I'd be." "I'm not forgiving. I'm just tired of carrying it around. Anger is heavy, Jennifer." I carried it for years, and it didn't change anything except make me exhausted. We talked for an hour about our lives, about what we'd learned, about the systems that pit people against each other and call it business. She was consulting now, helping companies develop better HR practices, trying to create environments where what happened to us wouldn't happen to others. Do you think it makes a difference, I asked, what you're doing? Probably not, but I have to try. I have to believe it's possible to build something better. When we parted, she hugged me, quick, awkward, but genuine. I'm glad you're doing well, she said. Really, you deserved better than what we gave you, and I'm glad you found it anyway. I watched her walk away, just another person in the city, carrying her own burdens, trying to make sense of her own story. Tonight, I'm standing in my office at Waterston Properties. It's late, everyone else has gone home, but I stayed to finish reviewing contracts for our newest acquisition. On my wall is a framed photo, not of any property or award, but of that first terrible house, the disaster I bought with every dollar I had. I keep it there to remember where I started, what I risked, how far I've come. My phone buzzes, a text from my mother. Dinner Sunday? Your sister wants to see you. I smile. I'll be there. Want me to bring anything? Just yourself, Mija. Always just yourself. I think about Sunday dinner, about family, about having space in my life for things that aren't work or survival or building or protecting, about finally being able to rest without feeling like rest is surrender. I think about Marcus sometimes, wonder where he ended up, if he ever understood what he did, if he learned anything. But not often. He's become like a character in a story I once read, interesting, impactful, but not part of my present life. I think about younger Elena Moore, the one who sat in that conference room 10 years ago, terrified and furious and heartbroken. I think about what I'd tell her if I could. I'd tell her, this isn't the end. It feels like it, but it isn't. This is just the moment everything changes. I'd tell her, you're going to work harder than you've ever worked. You're going to cry and rage and question everything. But you're also going to discover you're stronger than you knew, smarter, more capable. I'd tell her, the people who hurt you won't pay the price you want them to pay. There won't be dramatic confrontation or public vindication, but you'll pay yourself back 1,000-fold. You'll build something they can never touch. I'd tell her, stop looking for validation from people who can't see you. Start looking at what you see when you look at yourself. That's the only opinion that matters. But mostly, I'd tell her, hold on, just hold on, because the story doesn't end here. It starts here. I turn off the lights in my office, lock the door, walk through the building I own, past the security desk where Tom, yes, the same Tom from Apex, now works for me, past the directory showing all my tenants, all the businesses and lives that occupy this space, past the 11th floor where a new company is building its dreams in the same square footage that once held my nightmare. Outside, the city is alive with Friday night energy, people heading to dinners and bars and wherever people go when work is done. I walk to my car, drive home through streets I've come to know in every season, every mood. My condo is quiet. I pour wine, sit on my balcony, look at the lights. Somewhere in this city, someone is getting fired tonight. Someone is sitting in a conference room, hearing words that will devastate them, will make them question everything they thought they knew about their worth and their future. I can't help them. Can't tell them it'll be okay. Can't promise they'll land on their feet. Can't guarantee that injustice will resolve itself into poetry. But I can hope they find what I found, that getting knocked down isn't the end of the story. It's just the end of one chapter. And sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's building a life so solid, so complete, so entirely your own that what anyone else thinks or does or takes becomes irrelevant. It's standing in the space where you once begged for approval and realizing you don't need it anymore. It's owning the ground beneath the people who tried to bury you. It's peace. I close my eyes, feel the evening breeze, and let myself be here, not in the past, not planning the future, just present. He took away my job, my purpose, my pride. I took back everything he couldn't touch, the ground beneath him, and my peace.